The whispers reached him before the salad plates did. Someone checked the seating chart. I think the caterer wandered in and sat down. Elias Cobb sat where the planner had put him, at the last table by the kitchen doors, in a borrowed suit that pulled at the shoulders every time he reached for his water. The tent glowed with 1,000 small lights strung through the grapevines, and somewhere past the dance floor a string quartet was tuning. He kept his hands folded and his eyes down, which was a thing he had learned to do a long time ago, the way a man learns to stand still in the rain instead of running through it. A woman, 2 seats down, leaned toward her husband and did not lower her voice as much as she thought she did. She was elegant, dressed in something that cost more than Elias made in a good month, and she looked at his jacket the way people look at a stain. "That jacket is older than the bride," she said. "Is that your dad's suit?" Elias smoothed the borrowed lapel with 2 fingers. He had learned a long time ago that the quietest man in a room is usually the one carrying the most, and that carrying it quietly was its own kind of strength. He said nothing. He reached for his water and let the moment pass over him like weather. Across the tent, at a table where the light was better and the company was louder, a woman named Juliet Larkin watched the little cruelty land. She set down her fork. She had spent 30 years in rooms full of people performing, and she knew the difference between a man who had nothing to say and a man who had chosen not to say it. This one, she decided, was the second kind. Then the groom rose for his toast. He was young and handsome in a way that looked earned rather than given, and 200 faces turned to him with their glasses half lifted. He began the way grooms begin, with a joke about the seating and a thank you to the caterers, and the tent laughed on cue. Then, somewhere in the first minute, he stopped. He looked out past the good tables and the loud tables, all the way to the last table by the kitchen doors, and he set his notes face down on the linen. The quartet went quiet. The laughter thinned and died. 200 guests followed the groom's eyes to the plain man in the borrowed suit, and the plain man looked back at him and slowly set his glass down too. Before you keep going, guess who that groom is about to thank in front of everyone? Some answers you will not see coming. Stay with this one all the way to the end. 3 weeks earlier, there was no tent and no toast. There was only a garage, a boy, and a wedding invitation that nobody expected him to accept. The garage sat at the end of a gravel lot on the edge of a small town. 2 bays and a hand-painted sign, and on most mornings it smelled of diesel and coffee in about equal measure. Elias had owned it for 2 years, ever since the school district cut the shop program and handed him a thin envelope and a thinner speech. He had not argued. He had gone home, looked at his son, and decided that a man who could no longer teach a trade could at least practice one. On the Tuesday morning the story really begins. He was elbow-deep in the injector housing of a farm truck, and his friend Hank De La Rosa was on the creeper beneath it, keeping up a running argument with the universe. "You are the only man I know," Hank called up, "who charges people less when their week has gone bad." "Then I am charging right," Elias said. "That is not how a business works." "It is how this one works." Elias set the torque wrench down and wiped his hands. "Mrs. Alvarez teaches 2nd grade and drives 40 miles to do it. She is not paying full freight the same week her furnace died." Hank rolled out from under the truck and sat up, grinning despite himself. "You know what your problem is. You would rather be right about people than rich." "I have met rich people," Elias said. "I would rather be right." The bell over the office door jingled, and a young man in a delivery uniform leaned in, apologetic. His van had died in the lot, he said, and his route was already behind, and he did not have much on him. Elias wiped his hands and went out and had the alternator diagnosed before the kid finished explaining. It was a 20-minute fix and a part Elias happened to have on the shelf, and when the young man reached for his wallet, Elias waved it off. "Pay me by not idling in my lot next time your check engine light comes on," he said. "Come in when it is small. It is always cheaper when it is small." The kid thanked him 3 times and drove off, and Hank watched the whole thing from the doorway with his arms folded. "Small when it is small," Hank repeated. "You should put that on the sign." "It would not fit," Elias said. In the corner, on an upturned milk crate that served as his desk, an 8-year-old boy was doing long division and losing. Wyatt Cobb had his father's dark eyebrows and his late mother's stubborn chin, and when he got frustrated he chewed the end of his pencil until it looked like something a beaver had found. He was chewing it now. "Dad," Wyatt said without looking up, "you have to go to the wedding." Elias glanced at the refrigerator by the parts shelf, where an invitation hung under a magnet shaped like a wrench. It was cream-colored and hand-addressed, and it had arrived 2 weeks ago, and it had been quietly terrifying him ever since. The wedding of Micah Sutter and Harper Langley. The Langleys were the kind of family whose name was on a wing of the hospital and a bracket of the county fair. Elias was the kind of man who fixed the trucks that delivered to both. "I do not know if I belong at a thing like that, buddy," he said. Wyatt finally looked up. "Micah, put your name first on the list. I saw it when the mailman brought it. First, before the mayor and everybody." He dug in his pocket and produced a small lopsided object, a keychain the 2 of them had welded together one slow Saturday, a 5-pointed star with 1 point shorter than the rest. He crossed the oil-dark floor and pushed it into his father's hand. "Take this, for luck, and go." Elias closed his fingers around the little star. It was still warm from the boy's pocket. "All right," he said, "I will go." To understand why a groom would put a garage owner's name first on a wedding list, you have to go back further than the garage, back to when Elias Cobb was a different kind of man in a different kind of building. He had been many things. Married young to a woman named Colette, who laughed like she had invented the sound. A co-founder, at 24, of a metal fabrication shop he had built with a man named Spencer Kane. Cobb and Kane Metal Works had made things that mattered. Brackets and railings and the kind of safety-critical steel that holds a stairway to a wall, and for a while it had been good. Elias ran the floor and Kane ran the numbers, and Elias trusted him the way you trust a man whose name is next to yours on the door. He should not have. Spencer Kane took the company the way a tide takes a sandcastle. Slowly, then all at once, and always while you're looking somewhere else. Elias had been looking somewhere else. In the year Colette got sick, Elias missed board meetings for chemotherapy appointments and signed papers he was too tired to read, and by the time he looked up, Kane had engineered a buyout at a valuation that was a lie, a number less than half of what the company was worth, backed by a forged appraisal and a bookkeeper too frightened to say otherwise. Elias could have fought it. Fighting it would have meant lawyers and years and evenings, and he had a wife who was running out of evenings. So he signed. He took the small check, and he spent the last good months of Colette's life beside her, instead of beside a lawyer, and he has never once, in the 4 years since, decided he chose wrong. When she died in the spring of a year he does not like to name out loud, he was holding her hand and not a subpoena, and that, he has always said, was the better deal. But there had been a boy, too, in the years between the good times and the bad. When Elias still taught high school shop, a 16-year-old named Micah Sutter had landed in his third-period class like a thrown wrench. Angry, sharp, fatherless, one suspension away from a future nobody wanted to name. The other teachers had written him off. Elias had kept him after class instead, not to lecture him, but to hand him a torch. "Why do you even bother with me?" the boy had asked one afternoon, sullen over a weld he had ruined for the 3rd time. "Because somebody bothered with me once," Elias said, "when I was about your size and about that angry. You are not going to pay me back. You are going to pass it on. That is how it works." Micah had not washed out. He had learned to lay a bead of weld so clean it looked machine-made, and then he had learned that a boy who can do one hard thing well can do others, and he had gone off into the world and become someone. Elias had lost the company and the classroom both, but he had never once counted Micah among his losses. Some things you build outlast the building. The last time the two of them had really talked, before the invitation came, Micah had been 22, and standing in the garage doorway in a new work jacket, on his way to a job that would become a career. He had tried to hand Elias an envelope, thick with the first real money he had earned, and Elias had folded the young man's fingers back around it. "I told you," Elias had said, "you do not pay me back, you pass it on. Find the next angry kid at the kitchen table and hand him a torch." "And if I cannot find one," Micah had said, half joking, "can I just come tell everybody what you did?" "Nobody wants that speech," Elias had said, laughing. "Go on, you will be late." Micah had not forgotten the offer. He had only been saving it. The vineyard where the Langleys held the wedding was an hour out of town, all golden light and white linen, and Elias arrived in the borrowed suit, feeling every inch of its poor fit. A young planner with a headset and a clipboard looked him over, checked her chart with a small frown, and steered him toward the table by the kitchen, the one nobody watches. He went without complaint. He had sat at worse tables. He had not been there 5 minutes when a woman took the empty chair beside him. She was perhaps his age, silver beginning at her temples, in a dress that was elegant without trying to prove anything, and she sat down with the air of a person ducking out of the rain. "You are the only person here not performing," she said. "Do you mind if I hide with you?" "Best seat in the place," Elias said. "Nobody watches the kitchen table. You can eat 2 dinners and no one notices." She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. "Juliet," she said, and offered her hand. "Aunt of the bride. Officially I am here to be charming. I have decided to be honest instead." "Elias," he said, "friend of the groom. Officially I am here to blend in." "You are failing at that beautifully." They talked the way strangers talk when neither one wants anything from the other, which is to say easily. She told him she ran an engineering and construction firm, that she had lost her husband 6 years back, that weddings made her feel like a chaperone at her own life. He told her about the garage and the boy and Mrs. Alvarez's furnace. He did not tell her about the company he had lost because it was Micah's night. And a man does not bring his grief to a wedding like a guest who forgot to leave it in the car. Then a voice cut across the tent, warm and expansive, and Elias went still. Emmett Langley, the father of the bride, had risen to make an early toast. He was a broad, florid man who wore his money the way some men wear a heavy coat, and he lifted his glass toward a table near the head. "And a special welcome," Emmett boomed, "to my dear friend and future business partner, a man who needs no introduction in this county, Spencer Kane." The tent applauded. At the good table, a silver-haired man rose half out of his chair and gave the room a modest, practiced wave. Elias's hand closed slowly around his water glass. 4 years fell away in a single second, and it was all he could do to keep his face still. Beside him, Juliet noticed. She noticed the stillness, the way a person notices a change in the weather, and she filed it away without a word. She was, after all, an engineer. She knew that when something goes suddenly rigid, there is a load on it somewhere. Here is where most men would stand up and say who they are. Guess whether Elias does. Keep your answer in mind. He did not stand up. He sat, and he let the applause for Spencer Kane wash over him. And he thought about his son doing long division on a milk crate, and he decided that whatever else this night was going to be, It was not going to be the night he ruined Micah's wedding by settling a 4-year-old score. He had come to celebrate a boy he loved. He would do that, and he would go home. The evening pressed on him anyway. It has a way of pressing on a man in a borrowed suit at a rich family's party. A guest mistook him for staff and handed him an empty glass to take away, and Elias took it because arguing would have made a scene and set it quietly on a passing tray. When the string quartet's amplifier began to spit sparks from a cable someone had run across a damp patch of grass, the harried planner looked around, saw the plain man who looked like he worked with his hands, and asked him to have a look. Elias had a look. He killed the power at the strip, dried the connector, redressed the cable away from the water, and had the quartet playing again before most of the tent knew it had stopped. Nobody thanked him. He had not done it to be thanked. He had done it because a live cable on wet grass near 200 people is the kind of thing a man fixes, whether or not it is his job. Juliet had watched him do it from her chair. She had watched him find the fault, kill the power, and fix the thing without once looking around to see who was noticing. And something in her chest had shifted a quarter turn. She had spent a career around men who narrated every small competence into a large reputation. She had forgotten there was another kind. You could have let that spark all night and let the planner panic, she said when he came back. It would have made you look important, having them come find you again. It would have made somebody's dress catch, Elias said. That is not a trade I make. It was while he was wiping his hands on a cocktail napkin that Spencer Kane drifted over. Kane did not recognize him at first. The years and the plain suit and the kitchen table had done their work. He saw only a weathered man of the kind he was used to not seeing, and he offered the sort of smile a man offers the help when he is feeling generous. "Good work with the wire," Kane said. "Somebody has to keep the lights on, eh?" Then something in the shape of Elias's face caught, and the smile changed. It did not fall. It sharpened, the way a smile does on a man who has just found something he can enjoy. "Well," Kane said softly, "small world. Elias Cobb. You landed on your feet, I hope. Trucks, is it? Somebody has to keep the trucks running." "Somebody does," Elias said. "No hard feelings, I trust. Business is business. You were never much for the business end." Kane's eyes moved over the borrowed suit, cataloging it, pricing it, filing it under a heading he found satisfying. "You look well. You look exactly as well as I would have expected." Elias looked at him for a long moment. There were a great many things he could have said, and he was aware of every one of them, lined up behind his teeth like tools on a bench. He chose the smallest one. "Enjoy the wedding, Spencer," he said, and turned back toward the kitchen table. His hands, when he sat back down, were perfectly steady on his knees. It was the steadiness of a man choosing his son's friend over his own vindication, and it cost him more than anyone in that tent would ever know. Juliet had watched the whole exchange from 10 feet away, and when Elias sat, she came and sat too. For a while she said nothing. Then, quietly, she asked the question she had been holding. "You know him," she said, "Kane, and it is not a good knowing." Elias considered lying. He was tired, and the truth was heavy, and it was Micah's night. But there was something in Juliet Larkin's face that did not ask to be entertained, only answered. "He was my partner," Elias said. "A long time ago. We built a company together. When my wife was dying, he decided he would rather have all of it than half, and he found a way. It was legal enough that fighting it would have cost me the only months I had left with her, so I signed and I went home." He turned the borrowed cuff between his fingers. "I do not think about it most days. It is easier not to." Juliet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You could burn this whole night down with what you know. One sentence to the right person. Why won't you?" "Because it is Micah's night," Elias said. "Mine already happened, years ago, in a shop class, with a 16-year-old who thought he was garbage and turned out to be gold. I got the better end of that deal, too. I keep getting the better end. People just cannot always see it from the outside." Juliet Larkin sat with that for a long time. In her bag, folded in a leather portfolio, was a contract she had come to this wedding partly to close, a partnership agreement with a well-regarded county businessman named Spencer Kane. She had done her due diligence the way she always did, briskly and by the numbers, and the numbers had looked fine. Numbers usually do. She slid the portfolio a little deeper into her bag and did not take it out again. Then Micah rose to make his toast, and the story came back around to where it began. The plain man, the borrowed suit, the groom stopping mid-sentence to look at the last table by the kitchen doors. For a moment, the tent did not understand what was happening. Micah stood with his notes face down and his glass forgotten in his hand, and then he stepped away from the head table and began to walk. Down between the good tables and the loud tables, past the mayor and past Spencer Kane, all the way to the back, where he stopped beside the man everyone had spent the evening not seeing. "Everybody keeps asking who the man at that table is," Micah said, and his voice carried now, steady and clear. "I have heard 3 people call him the caterer. Somebody asked whose father he was. So let me answer, because I've wanted to say this in front of a lot of people for a long time." He put his hand on Elias's shoulder. "When I was 16, I was about a month from throwing my whole life into a ditch. My dad was gone, my grades were gone, and every adult in that building had already decided how my story ended. This man had not decided. He kept me after class, and instead of a suspension slip, he handed me a torch, and he told me I was worth something. I did not believe him. He believed it hard enough for both of us until I caught up." Micah's voice thickened, and he let it. "His name used to be on a company. It is not anymore, and that is a story for another day, and it is not a good one. But I am standing here in this suit, marrying this woman, because Elias Cobb decided an angry kid at the kitchen table was worth his time. So before anybody drinks to me, I would like all of you to drink to him." For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a chair scraped somewhere near the front, then another, and then, in ones and twos, and finally all at once, 200 people rose to their feet in a tent full of golden light, and lifted their glasses toward the last table by the kitchen doors, and the table nobody watched became the only table that mattered. Elias stood because a boy he had raised had just called him worthy in front of the whole world, and because it would have been unkind to Micah to stay in his seat. He did not make a speech. He put his hand over Micah's hand on his shoulder, and he said low, just for the two of them, "You did the passing on I told you that you would." Across the tent, Spencer Kane stood too, because everyone was standing, and his glass was in his hand, and his smile had gone strange and thin. And Emmett Langley, who had seated the plain man by the kitchen and toasted the polished thief at the head, looked from one man to the other with the dawning, sickening expression of a man who has just realized he bet on the wrong horse in front of everyone he knows. The unraveling did not happen that night. It happened over the following 10 days, quietly, the way real things usually do. It began with Juliet, who could not let a rigid load go unexamined. She went back to her firm, and she reopened the file on the partnership she had almost signed, and this time she did not read the numbers Spencer Kane had given her. She read the numbers underneath them. It did not take an engineer long to see that a valuation had been bent once, years ago, and that the bend had a shape, and that the shape had a name. She found the bookkeeper through an old employee roll. Marlene Duffy was 61 now, long retired, living in a small tidy house with a garden she fussed over. When Juliet explained why she had come, the old woman sat down hard in her kitchen chair and put a hand over her mouth, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I signed it," Marlene said finally. "The appraisal. He told me it was a formality, and then he told me what would happen to my job and my pension if it was not. I had 2 years to retirement. I told myself it was not my business what 2 owners did between them." Her eyes were wet. "I have carried that for 4 years. I kept the real one, you know, the true appraisal. I do not know why. I think I wanted somebody to find it someday." She went to a bureau drawer and took out a folder gone soft at the corners, and she held it a moment before she gave it up. A week after the wedding, in the boardroom of the County Manufacturers Association, where Spencer Kane had sat as chairman for 6 years, the folder came out on the long table, the forged appraisal and the true one side by side, and there was very little left to argue. Kane tried, because men like Kane always try, but the numbers were the numbers, and Marlene Duffy's signed statement was the signature, and a room that had applauded him at a wedding 10 days before now looked at the grain of the table rather than at his face. The vote came 7-1. Spencer Kane gathered his coat while a room he used to own studied its own hands, and he walked out of the building that had put his name on a plaque, and the plaque came down that afternoon. No one shouted. No one needed to. That is the thing about a paper trail. It does not raise its voice. Elias was not in the room for the vote. He heard about it from Juliet later on the phone, and his first question was not about Kane. "How is Marlene?" he asked. "Afraid," Juliet said. "She thinks you must hate her." So Elias drove out to the tidy house with the fussed-over garden, and he sat in the old woman's kitchen, and when Marlene started to apologize, he stopped her. "You signed it," she said. "I signed it. I took 4 years of your—" "You just carried that folder into a room that needed it," Elias said gently. "You could have burned it any time in 4 years. You kept it. Then you set it down where it counted. That is the part I am going to remember." He put his rough hand over her thin one. "Set the rest down, Marlene. You have carried it long enough." She cried then, the way people cry when they finally put down a thing they have been holding so long they forgot it had a weight, and Elias let her, and did not hurry her. And when she was done, he stayed for a cup of the terrible coffee she made and admired the garden through the window. Emmett Langley came to the garage the following week without an audience, which was the only way a proud man knows how to apologize. He stood in the doorway of the second bay in a very good coat and looked at the 2 lifts and the milk crate desk and the invitation still hanging on the refrigerator, and he cleared his throat twice before he managed it. "I sat you by the kitchen," Emmett said. "I toasted that man at the head table. I have spent a week being ashamed of both. I would like to buy you a proper dinner, and I would like to apologize somewhere people can see it, since I did the insult where they could." He paused. "My daughter married into more than she knew. So did I, it turns out. I did not understand what I was standing next to." "You do not owe me a public dinner," Elias said, "but I will take a private handshake." Emmett shook his hand hard, twice, like a man sealing something, and left a better man than he arrived, which is the most that can be asked of anybody. He turned back at the door, though, the way people do when the real thing they came to say has been waiting behind the easy thing. "My daughter tells me you welded that little star with your boy," Emmett said, nodding at the keychain on the workbench. "Harper wants one, for the truck we are giving them. She says a marriage should have something in it that was made by hand and a little bit crooked, so nobody expects it to be perfect. He almost smiled. She is smarter than her father. I am learning to be all right with that. Send Micah by, Elias said. He can make it himself. He is better at it than I am now. He just does not believe it yet. The settlement, when it came, restored what could be restored. Elias's name went back onto a share of the company, and an equity that had been stolen came quietly home, verified this time by real numbers on real paper. He did not take the whole thing back. He could have. Lawyers told him he could push for control, for the corner office, for the vindication of walking back into the building that had thrown him out. He sat in the garage at night with Hank and turned it down. Most men, Hank said, would take the corner office. Most men do not have a boy who needs them home by 3, Elias said. I will take my name back, and a fair share, and I will keep these 2 bays in my afternoons. I already ran a company once. I like the floor better than the office anyway. Hank shook his head, the way he shook it at every uneconomical thing his friend had ever done, and grinned, the way he grinned at every one of them, too. Wyatt had watched the toast from the folding chair beside his father, and in the weeks afterward he delivered his verdict the way 8-year-olds deliver verdicts, which is to say once, plainly, and then never again, because it does not require repeating. Everybody clapped for you at the wedding, Dad, he said one evening, working a puzzle on the kitchen floor. The whole tent. I saw. He fit a piece and did not look up. I already knew you were like that, but it was nice they found out. Elias sat down on the floor beside his son and helped him find the edge pieces, and in his pocket, warm from a day of being carried, was a lopsided little welded star with 1 point shorter than the rest. Juliet Larkin started coming to the garage. She came first with a legitimate contract, engineering work, real and fairly priced, because her firm needed a shop that did honest steel, and she had finally found one. Then she came with 2 coffees. Then she came for reasons that had nothing to do with steel at all. I came to talk equity, she said one Saturday, leaning on the fender of the farm truck while Elias worked. I keep staying for the company. The coffee here is terrible, Elias said, not looking up from the injector, smiling anyway. People keep coming back for it. I have never understood it. I have, Juliet said. It was a slow thing and a quiet one, and neither of them was in any hurry, which was exactly how both of them wanted it. She was not a woman who fell easily, and he was not a man who reached easily, and so they met somewhere in the unhurried middle, over bad coffee and good work, with an 8-year-old chaperone who approved of her before either adult admitted there was anything to approve of. Wyatt liked that she asked him real questions, and did not talk to him in the bright, false voice adults use on children. That was in Wyatt's ledger the whole test, and she passed it without knowing it was being given. One Saturday in the fall, the 3 of them ended up around the small kitchen table for no particular reason. An ordinary afternoon that felt, in a way none of them said out loud, like the start of something. Wyatt set 3 plates without being asked. Nobody remarked on it. Some things are better for going unremarked. Elias returned the borrowed suit to the cousin he had gotten it from, cleaned and pressed, with a note of thanks. Then he did something he had not done in years. He drove into town and bought one plain dark suit that actually fit him, off the rack, nothing fine, and he hung it by the door at the garage where he would be able to find it. "What is the suit for?" Hank asked, eyeing it. "The next wedding," Elias said. "There is always a next wedding, and I am done being surprised by them." A borrowed suit had been enough to make a whole tent laugh. It had turned out to be enough, too, to bring a 4-year-old truth up into the light, though nobody in that tent could have guessed it, least of all the elegant woman who had asked whose father he was. On an evening, not long after, the garage sign got a second line of paint, smaller than the first, and the 2 bays stayed lit a little later than usual while Elias finished a brake job he had promised for the morning. Through the front window, hung on a bit of wire where the last of the daylight could reach it, a lopsided little welded star turned slowly in the draft from the open door, 1 point shorter than the rest, throwing a thin blade of light across the oil-dark floor. 3 cups of coffee cooled on the workbench, going cold and unminded, the way coffee does in a place where the people have found better things to do than drink it. The little star turned in the window and caught the low sun, and the shop that carried his name again settled into the deep quiet of a place where, at long last, the right people had finally stopped to look.